If you're Duolingo, with over 500 million app downloads, teaching 40 plus languages, you keep pretty busy.
We have over 400 engineers here building all of the cool things that you see. But it's really important to be able to ship code without disrupting an excellent learner experience.
Given that number of engineers, how does Duolingo manage to make learning accessible to everyone, everywhere?
GitHub Copilot is very popular at Duolingo, and we learn new ways to leverage it every day to improve how we teach. Most of our engineering function is regularly using Copilot. One of the great things is how much it reduces friction. You want to make a quick change to a code base to fix a quick bug or to conform to the new style, and Copilot completes that seamlessly.
Sounds like Copilot's easy to use, but how does that help engineers make Duolingo better?
We've seen a 25% productivity increase with Copilot, and that frees up so much of your time in the day to have more thoughtful conversations and talk about your next big idea.
What would traditionally take days or weeks can happen in minutes.
At Duolingo, employees use the app every day. Let's check in with the team and see what they're learning.
I'm learning French.
And I'm learning Italian.
Copilot makes day-to-day life easier so you can spend your time thinking more about how I want to improve the experience for people learning a language.
I'm learning Chinese.
And I'm learning Finnish.
GitHub is at the center of our engineering, and it makes it easier for us to develop a more delightful experience for our learners.
I'm learning Klingon.
Really? Klingon? It seems Duolingo and Copilot are a pretty good duo. Get it? Okay. Peter, why don't you take over?
I don't want to use an editor that doesn't have Copilot in the same way that I don't want to write text that doesn't have spell check.
join us from and how we can get involved in open source through your lens. So welcome to Open Source Friday. For those of you who are new here, this is a program sponsored by GitHub, which is dedicated to you, the community, the contributors, the maintainers, and everyone who has an interest in keeping the open source ecosystem alive and well. And today's topic is extremely relevant to that of sustainability and keeping the open source ecosystem alive and well. And that is, we're going to be talking about package dependencies, packages. We're going to be talking about what happens when there is an update or when something is no longer maintained and how that impacts your projects. I think we can do a show of hands. If you raise your hand now, leave us a comment in the chat if this happened to you before. So you know, you build this project, you love the things that you built it with, you chose your tooling very intentionally for a reason, but guess what? Maintainers are human beings, and sometimes things either progress outside of the capabilities of where the package is or the specific project is, or sometimes maintainers don't want to maintain things anymore and they moved on to other projects. And the beauty of open source is that we can all go and grab it and make it our own. But then maybe you don't want to be a maintainer yourself. Maybe that is not your prerogative. So we're going to talk to an expert on this very topic today. I am super thrilled to have with us Jordan Harband. Jordan Harband has got a ton of experience in open source. Right now, he's a principal open source architect at Hero Devs, which is a company that does some really exciting and interesting things relevant to the topic we're talking about actually today. They provide services for projects who are using packages that are no longer being maintained. So keeping you secure. But we'll let Jordan tell us a little bit more about their role there and what they do. Besides that, and of course, in Jordan's own words, he is a JavaScript expert, package maintainer, maintains several packages on NPM. There is an amazing ReadMe profile of Jordan that I will share the link on the notes so that you can take a look and read it at your own time, because it's got a really good profile of what maintainership means to him and some good foresight for you to think about if that's something you're wanting to get into. He wears many hats. He's a teacher. He's childcare. I love that. Their focus, again, is JavaScript standards, front-end web development, full stack, front-end, back-end, and databases, architecture design. Their specialties are CSS, HTML, Ruby on Rails, PHP. The list goes on. So this is someone that's been in the open source ecosystem for a very long time and has helped maintain a lot of the things that we're probably all using right now. So without further ado, let's welcome Jordan to the stage. Hello, Jordan. Welcome.
Hi. Thank
Welcome,
you. Happy to be
welcome.
here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you are on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. We're doing like across the universe Open
Absolutely.
Source Friday today. But thank you so much for your time again. I gave you a poorly rated intro, and I apologize for that.
No,
I
that
had
was great. Thank you.
too many screens open all over the place, which is very similar to what you yourself say on your intro, that you wear many hats, which is awesome. I'd like to begin by asking you currently what your role is, and then we can dig in a little bit about how you got involved in open source, and then we'll get to the topic at hand, which I think that many folks from an audience are absolutely dying to learn more about what they can do, how they can prevent these bad things to happen to them. What are you doing currently professionally?
Yes, I just started actually in December working at a company called Hero Devs. And essentially what they do is they, in partnership with maintainers, they'll sell long-term support, never-ending support on end-of-life open source software. So for example, Vue 3 is the current version of Vue and Vue 2 is end of life. If you're still stuck on Vue 2, you can pay Hero Devs and make sure that you don't have any security vulnerabilities. Same applies for AngularJS and a bunch of old Angular versions, Drupal, Bootstrap, and a bunch of others. So it's for those that are stuck on an old version, either because they don't have the budget to upgrade or the expertise isn't in-house anymore, or they're in a highly regulated industry and they like legally can't change their software, they still need to make sure they're secure. And this is a way they can do that. And then we try and funnel some of that money back into the open source ecosystem. And so, for example, Hero Devs is one of the largest donors or contributors to Vue. And so
Wow.
this by partnering with Evan, we've been able to help him free to work on Vue 3 while still supporting Vue 2 users. And so it's a win for everyone.
I appreciate that. This is such an interesting concept. How old is this company?
They've been around a couple years. They had a
Uh-huh.
previous, the original product they sold was just AngularJS, and it was a company was called XLTS, and it's now a new company and it has a much broader product offering. So yeah.
I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing a bit about what you're doing now. Obviously, it's a new gig. You started in December.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank
I appreciate every time that there's a company that's built a top open source, or for an open source mission, and
you.
there is a focus on giving back and having that impact would it be through financial contributions or actually provide a great service like this? I'm sure
Mm.
there's a lot of folks out there that are thinking like, let me go to this page and figure it out if they can help me.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Yeah,
I like to always go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, it's my agenda in the company is not a secret, right? I'm explicitly trying to maximize the amount of money that goes into the open source ecosystem and to open source maintainers. So and the company's on board with that, which is a big part of why I'm there.
I love it, Jordan. You're living the dream. Honestly, that's what I think a lot of folks who have a heart for open source would love to do. I'm like, can you pay me so I can actually make this better? And then also you pay and make it better. That's so good. Thank you again for sharing that. So I have to throw it back to the beginning. We're going to go back and let's date ourselves, all of us. Did you remember your first open source contribution? Like, I need to understand the evolution of how Jordan starts in open source
Yeah.
and then becomes a maintainer of so many packages and that are so impactful to so many different applications.
Yeah, absolutely. It started small. I think my first PR was a infield labels plugin, jQuery plugin that my employer at the time was using on their website. This was before we all realized that was a bad user experience pattern. And I did the pull request, and I got more and more into being able to fix the software, like file issues, but also make fixes on the software that I was using. And then similarly, I felt more free to go and adopt and use open source software. And then just one project at a time, maintainers just started, like, you file enough good issues or PRs and maintainers just kind of hand you the keys, was my experience. And so I started maintaining NVM, the node version manager, for that reason. And I didn't it's written in POSIX, not even bash, like it's a shell script. So
Wow.
there's not even arrays really. So I didn't know anything about shell scripting when I took it over. And so everything I know about it, I've learned kind of the hard way, trying to be very careful not to screw anyone over, not to break anyone, lots of Googling, lots of asking people for help, things like that. And one of the projects I took over was the ES5 shim and ES6 shim, which were basically JavaScript polyfills for newer JavaScript functionality, so that you could, IE8 didn't have array map, or doesn't have array map. And back then, a lot of people still used IE8. And so if you used a polyfill for it, then you didn't have to care that you were using IE8 in that way. There are other ways you might have had to care, but you could just use .map on your arrays, and it was great. That's the general premise of polyfills. But in order to maintain those, I had to pay attention to the specification for the language. And that's how I got involved in TC39, which is the JavaScript standards committee that writes the language specification. And along that vein, I've just continued to work on projects that I use, and it's a snowball effect. I think the more packages I started maintaining, the more reliable my reputation was, and the more credible a maintainer I was. And so the easier it was for people to just give me permissions on their packages if I was willing to do the work. And yeah, and it's terrifying how wide reaching my code is. Like, it should be terrifying to anyone, but it's very terrifying to me. I think depending on the week, it's something like 5 to 10% of all of NPM's download traffic is
No
packages I maintain,
way.
which is just absurdly high. And I've definitely broken a lot of people making what I thought was an innocuous change. And it is a very scary and humbling experience. So as a result, I tend to have probably more PTSD than most about breaking stuff. So I'm like on the spectrum of how much people care about backwards compatibility, or about complying with semantic versioning with Semver, or not shipping bugs. Like, I am very much on the more paranoid and cautious side. Not everyone is, and not everyone likes that that's the way I am, because that my software is impacted by those choices, and then my users are impacted as a result, positively or negatively. But that sort of leads me to the topic that we're talking about today, which is basically the actual cost of breaking changes on the ecosystem.
Exactly. And you know what? Like, you feel that empathy at a high level because you've been there, you understand the consequences. And yeah, I think we got into this ship fast and break things. And a lot of companies really, heck, I'll be the first one to say that I know here at GitHub, we have done things before that we have had to roll back, reasons for that. And you start thinking,
Absolutely.
oh, maybe this is not affecting, if we have millions of users, it's a small person. And then when you make the change, you realize actually how many people actually depended on the things that you had set a certain way, and why it's so important to provide a path to at least continue to be able to provide the same service, or at least be able to
Yeah.
get over that without breaking everything.
And that very mindset, move fast and break things, it's not a universally held opinion, but there's an argument that one of the social networks whose motto was move fast and break things ended up breaking democracy at one point. And you don't have to agree with that or not. But if that is the case, then that's a pretty unintended consequence of trying to iterate quickly. So
Oh,
I
it's
think it's
sobering.
an
Sobering. And
important
it should give us
balance.
pause. And it should give
Yes.
everyone, if you're watching this and you're a builder, or if you are thinking about the next big idea, or you're working on your startup and you're thinking, what open source amazingness I'm going to create this company on top of, keep that in mind. Keep the
Yeah.
responsibility of it in mind, because it's not without impact for sure.
Yeah, there's the quote I like. I think it's a Navy motto. It's "We go slow so we can go fast," something to that effect. I'm probably quoting it wrong, but it essentially means that the slower and smoother you go, the faster you're able to move over time. And I have learned the hard way that is very true, and that it is better to be cautious and slow than to make the wrong decision often. Obviously, there's exceptions, but that to me that's true more often than not.
I love that. And obviously, you have the experience to back that statement up. Like many things in life, I'm sure this isn't like a learn, like you came out of becoming a maintainer and started like that. I know definitely I personally
Well,
made mistakes.
everyone will have different lived experiences, right? I'm sure
Oh,
there's
for
just as
sure.
many people out there that have been traumatized by not making, like by inaction, by people not making decisions and doing
Exactly.
nothing. And they will feel very strongly that doing something is better than doing nothing. And those are valid too. It's just you got to find the balance on
It's
each particular case.
it's such a big responsibility when you're talking about things that can literally, again, if there's a company and it's built and it's using your technology and you make a change and all of a sudden their millions of users can no longer access whatever their
Yeah.
product is because Jordan or a maintainer somewhere decided to
Right.
make the change.
Yeah.
So I'd love to understand a little bit better about, obviously you have had so much experience on this. The company that you work for currently actually specializes in a very niche part of
Yeah.
this conversation. So what are you thinking? What can we do? How do we know? Take me through from the beginning. How can
So
we
I
be
think,
better about what we choose to use and making sure that when we're making these
yeah,
changes,
well,
we're not breaking everything?
it's a very good question, very important one. I do want to show some data to back up
Yes,
why this is important.
please. Would you like me to share your screen? Is that the one
Yes,
that we want to
please.
share? Let's do this. And you
So
have to tell
this
us
is
what we're looking at because this is amazing, by the way. I'm obsessed.
absolutely. So this website, majors.nullvoxpopuli.com, is made by an arbitrary open source developer, someone I've interacted with a number of times, but don't know personally. It takes NPM's own per version download data and groups it, aggregates it by major version line. And you can split it to minors if you want. But as you can see, this library is QS. It's a query string parser and serializer. It's not a library I created, but it's one I maintain, and it's one of the largest ones that I maintain. As you can see, almost every user, at 99% of them, are on version 6, which means that if there's a security problem in QS and I fix it in version 6, everyone gets the fix because it's within the Semver range. You can certainly see if I split it up by minors that there's a lot more people still on 6.5 and 6.11 than are on the newest 6.12. But nonetheless, so personally, I may do a security backport to that minor line to make sure that I hit those users. But either way, it means that all of them can upgrade without breaking anything to the very latest and get the latest fixes. That's, I think, a success story. There are certainly breaking changes I want to make in QS, and I have lined them up, and I'm hoping to do a version 7 of QS this year. However, almost all of the breaking changes are just flipping an options default, which gets to the question you asked. That in other words, that you can use the default behavior in V7, you'll be able to use in V6 if you configure your options a certain way. And in V7, if you want to keep using the behavior from V6, you just configure your options for that, and then it's not actually breaking. So my experience tells me that is the smoothest way to do a major version of any software is you ship all the new functionality behind options, and then you just change the defaults at the major version and leave the old functionality. And that way everyone can upgrade very easily, but new users get the new defaults that you think are better or more appropriate or less bug prone or whatever. And then
Those are the folks that are
similarly,
not as concerned as the way it used to work when you first shipped it. So that makes sense.
exactly. And so then here's this package Semver. This is the most used package on NPM. It's used by NPM itself and tons of other tools to work with semantic version numbers and ranges. And as you can see, this is actually a very acceptable, a decent kind of distribution here. Most people are on the latest major, version 7. That's great. The next chunk down is version 6, and the next chunk down is version 5, and there's almost no one on version 4. So this is good. This is showing that the upgrades are achievable and desired. People want the newer versions, like whatever the changes are, that people don't dislike them. And you can expect over time, or I expect over time, that 5 and 6s will fall as 7 goes up. And if a V8 comes out, I would expect the same kind of general progression over time. That story is not always the case, though. You can see on this package that virtually no users are on version 3, like almost as many as version 1. And almost every user, some 90%, I didn't do the math yet, is on version 2. Now, the specific reason that the specific breaking change they made here was going ESM only. So anyone who's using require CJS has to stay with V2. And that's probably the reason why this difference is so stark. But this can happen with other breaking changes as well for any reason. It depends on what the change is and how difficult it is for people to upgrade, and if it forces them to upgrade other things or not. Here's another package. As you can see, version 5 is the first ESM only one. Most people are on version 4, but there's still a huge chunk on version 2. And the difference between 2 and 3 is it's not about the module format. So I haven't even looked at the changelog to see what those reasons are, but there's a bunch of people that never got off version 2. And that is not what you want to see. You want to see that nice slope that we see from Semver, where people are gradually catching up and doing their upgrades. And then here's another package marked. This one, I don't know which version went ESM only. I didn't check, but one of them did. And my guess is that it's after version 4, because version 4 also has the majority, even though they're up to version 12. So what this means is that the maintainers of marked either have to do extra free unpaid work to support the users still on version 4, or all those users are screwed and left out in the cold. And none of those choices are a good choice. And I don't mean to imply that there's a morally correct choice or like an objectively correct choice. Nobody's paying the Mark developers to do it. There's no contract. Like, it's open source software. It's as is, right? They don't have to do anything. It's just the consequences of their choices. And this is, I'm not trying to just pick on this package. You could throw any package you want into this website and get a picture of the sort of picture I'm describing. But I think that because open source is vastly underpaid and funded and difficult to sustain, it is very critical that maintainers not overburden themselves. So if I was the marked maintainers at this point and I didn't have the time to maintain version 4, I'm just going to tell those people, sorry, you should upgrade. Doesn't mean they'll be able to. That doesn't mean that it's nice for them to have that be told, but that still might be a reasonable thing for me to say as the maintainer. But as the user, especially, and here's the part where it particularly matters, my guess is that a lot of the people using version 4 of this package are not using it directly. They're using it transitively. They're using something else that's using version 4.
Right.
And so that sort of highlights that the choices of a few people, the marked maintainers, and then whoever is in between marked and the user's application, are impacting a large number of users, right? This is 5.7 million like downloads over,
Yes, a big
I think
number.
it's over the last week or something. So it is not fun to be in a position where you are a small group of people, one person or a few people, making decisions that impact lots of other people, because some of them are going to be pissed off and they're going to complain and you're going to be causing them pain and suffering. And that's not fun for, I think most people don't want to cause suffering for other people, but the choices have to be made one way or the other. Somebody either has to not do a breaking change and keep supporting what they're doing, or they have to do one and then support both or drop one. Like they're hard choices. But I think that there are packages, and I'm not even highlighting my own as one of them, but you can look at Semver, which I don't maintain. There are ways to do breaking changes that don't leave all those users out in the cold. If your breaking changes are just dropping a platform version, then that's, as much as I am personally loath to do that, I think that's actually a fine type of breaking change, because you just upgrade your node version or tell your users to upgrade their browser or whatever it is. And all the functionality is roughly the same. And that in Semver, I think most of their breaking changes are dropping platform versions. And so that's why you get the sort of ideal, almost
Nice.
ideal graph here
Right.
is because the people stuck on V5 and V6 almost certainly are trying to retain compatibility with node versions that V7 no longer supports. There may be other breaking changes, but I suspect that's the primary reason. So another reason this is a huge cost is when something is used transitively, it is used in a lot of different ways, and the maintainer, so at Chalk, for example, that's a tool that lets you colorize text on the command line. So
Okay.
a lot of command line tools use it, or anything that outputs log information, to sort of syntax highlight right on the command line. It's very useful. It's not the only package that does it, but it's by far the most used. And that's a good indicator that it's the most reliable. The challenge here, though, is if there is a security vulnerability in version 4, suddenly 190 million people potentially, because those downloads, they're not a direct map. That doesn't mean there's exactly that many people downloading it. It could be more. It could be less, but it's probably more. Anyone that's downloading it once and then using that cached version, or they have an internal registry at their company, they're not going to show up in these numbers.
Right.
But nonetheless, that's a lot of people that will have a security vulnerability. And even if that's fixed in version 5, the maintainers of Chalk are now faced with this difficult choice. Do we leave a large number of people with a security vulnerability, or do we do extra work for free and go and fix it? That
Wow.
sucks for everyone. Obviously, allowing maintainers to make their choices and then saying, but we'll pay you to do that work, that would be a great outcome. I encourage you all to get your employers to contribute to open source just in general, either directly or through something like Tidelift or Thanks.dev. But the way I prefer to operate, and what I would encourage maintainers out there to do, is avoid finding yourself in this scenario and minimize breaking changes. And as you can see, I don't have to worry about that. And I even backport on QS specifically, and I think only on QS, I backport security fixes to minor versions. And it's actually pretty easy because there's no breaking changes. So it's really easy for me to keep QS's users very secure. And it doesn't cost a lot of effort or time for me. And it would be wonderful if that was rewarded with financial contribution from companies. But either way, it's a smaller burden on me as a result. So I would encourage everyone to do that, to avoid breaking changes, that if you're gonna do a breaking change, ship the functionality behind an option first and give people the time to use it before you force it on them. And then also, when you do the major bump, don't remove the old functionality, just keep it behind an option. And with any luck, you can get yourself whatever package you maintain, you can get it to this kind of a graph where all your users are on the latest version. And my hope is that when I publish V7 sometime this year, that within months or a year, however long it takes, I would hope that the vast majority of these 75 million downloads move over to V7.
So then you
And then maybe it won't. Maybe my premise is wrong, but if my premise is correct, the fact that all you have to do to move to 7 without a break is like hard code some of the default config values, the default option values, and then it'll just work the same on V7. My hope is that makes it really easy for everyone to upgrade.
I love that. I love that you're giving us some ways that maintainers can keep this in mind when they're making their upgrades.
Yeah.
So definitely the responsibility of backwards compatibility. Like, when does it end, though? I wonder for you as a maintainer, because like, how old is QS, for example? Like, did you remember
Oh,
when you
man.
put out your first version?
So QS, I didn't create it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very long time ago. The first version was published 13 years ago, it says.
Wow.
And I started maintaining it within version 6. And version 6 was published, 8 years ago. So it's, I don't know, probably 5-6 years ago was when I took it over, something like that. So when does it end? That's a good question. The one extreme, it's a spectrum like everything else, right? The extreme answer I usually pick on my packages, because most of my packages are small and single purpose, and it's easy to implement this suggestion, is it never ends.
Okay.
Just support everything forever, because it's not hard most of the time. And the more that all of my packages are composed of smaller packages, and though it's like Legos putting them together. And the more that the core components are broadly compatible, the less that they're ever going to be the reason why I have trouble building something bigger. So a top level thing like ESLint, for example, doesn't really matter if it supports old versions of Node, because no one needs to run a linter on an old version of Node. You can just run that on new Node, even if you're using old Node in production. A lot of my stuff isn't developer only tools. It's stuff that runs in production, and it might need to work on old versions of Node or old versions of browsers that are a good that Node is a good stand-in for, that an old version of Node is a good stand-in for. And I don't ever want to be the reason why someone like can't use my software. Essentially, ideally I want to make sure that my stuff works as far as possible. But like that, I've resisted making a break and change on QS for 6 some odd years, and as I said, I already have a branch lined up on my computer for getting V7 prepared. So there is a time, right, where it's okay to make breaking changes, and that's going to be different for everyone. And I have a feeling that most people would think that that I'm choosing that time too late or too slowly, but we all have to make our choices based on our own experiences.
Of course. And you've given us such a good point for people who are maintainers and are thinking about how they go through that thought process of, okay, when is the time and how long should I be responsible and all that. And then once you make the changes, like how do you encourage people? I'd love to know. I'm coming from a place where I don't have a clear example because I'm not maintaining anything at the moment, but like we've done something very specific. We were trying to encourage people to adopt 2FA for, actually, I think it was for NPM. And the emails went out, it was recurrent.
Yeah.
You now need to do this. You now need to do this. And still the rate of adoption, super little. Like how do you encourage your users to actually keep this up to date? Like, how do you go? I feel like it's like going against the wave a bit. What do you personally do? Like, how do you communicate these things? And then I love how you mentioned earlier, how give people appropriate time for them to figure out how they're going to actually implement this before you actually make this the actual change.
Right.
Love to see what thoughts you have there.
Yeah, two-factor is unique because it's a dramatic workflow change.
Right.
But I don't know what the actual data looks like inside GitHub or NPM, but NPM has essentially made it that you can't publish a popular enough package unless you have two-factor enabled. So it is fine if the adoption isn't high, because until your package is high, it has a high impact. If someone hacks you, like only a small number of people are going to be affected. That's still undesirable, but we have to make trade-offs somewhere.
Right.
And presumably NPM can ratchet down that threshold of how popular a package needs to be before two-factor is mandatory. So when you're in a centralized position like that, there's lots of ways to do it. You send out reminders, you pop up little banners, you can start gradually requiring it until it becomes more and more a no-brainer for people. With open source, you don't have any of those levers. Like all you've got is a deprecation message on NPM, archiving a GitHub repo, throwing up a notice in a banner, or like logging a debug warning, hey, this thing is deprecated. And so that's to me, that's a reason why needing to push people to make a change should be avoided, because it's hard. So like, why would you set yourself up for failure? But sometimes you still want to push people, and there's just not a great solution there. If you have a package that's used transitively, mostly, then you can go to the dependency that's using you, and you can put a pull request in, or you can ask them, hey, can you upgrade? And then that will cover most of your users. But if you have a thing that people are using directly, sticks don't really work. You have to use carrots. And I think that's generally true in life anyway, but it especially doesn't work when there's no way to apply a stick. If people will upgrade if they want what the newer version has. And
so make it attractive.
Yeah.
Make motivational enough.
And by that, new features, not security fixes. You want things to, you want people to exactly be attracted to the new features that it offers, or maybe better performance or something, but you don't want to sacrifice the correctness or security in order to do that. That's holding the wrong thing hostage, in my opinion.
Of course. That is super, super interesting. I'm sure in your role now, like you see projects that are either coming to end of life or certain versions. Do you have a good example of one that you've seen that you feel like this is how you're supposed to do it? And I know it's obviously it's going to be a bit different because that's part of the job of the company to do that. But
Mhm.
it could be one within your company, or it can be one that you have seen that has been a major version change and it's
Yeah.
been like the process. You're like, look at that, they did it right.
Yeah. I think a lot of them do, luckily. I don't use personally Vue or Angular much, but React actually, even though I'm not a fan of every change they've made, like they do a really good job and a lot of work writing guides and documentation and providing code mods and creating linter rules and stuff so that as you upgrade major versions, it's as easy as they can make it. They certainly could make choices that would make it even easier, but like I don't have anything bad to say about the way that in which they're doing the breaking changes. They're doing an excellent job at it. And I see the same thing for a lot of the larger packages. Even, I don't know, Webpack, Babel, ESLint, like still I don't have to agree with the content of the breaking change, but all of them consistently do a really good job at rolling out a breaking change. And
That's good.
by making it as easy as possible for users to do it. And that's great to see.
That's awesome to know, and of interest, of course, to maintainers. Now, if I'm a developer, what can I do to set up my project for success and to make sure that I'm using what I should be using? Now, of course, it's ice cream sundae, like it's all the flavors and you pick whatever you want, but how can I make better educated choices and being more intentional?
So there's a lot of things that for some are going to be obvious best practices, and maybe for others are new information. Use a package. If you're just talking about JavaScript, right, use NPM packages. Like only install things from a registry, whether it's the public registry or one of the alternatives that's out there or a company registry. Don't install things from GitHub or from a URL or from somewhere else
That
on
you
your
don't
file
know where
system,
it came from. Yes, please. Let's shout
right?
that out.
So that's a good one.
Yeah.
Definitely write thorough tests. There's a lot of opinions out there about how to write tests, and that would be like 7 other podcasts to talk about or 7 other hours. But write tests that should continue to pass if you make like internal refactors that don't change the observable behavior of your API, and write tests that will fail if you break any of those things. And that, because that helps when you do an upgrade, you want to have confidence that it's going to work before you deploy it. And tests are how you do that. And linting and type systems are not tests. They are helpful, and you must have linting, and you probably should have types in some form in an application at this point. But none of those allow you to skip tests. You have to write tests always. And I don't mean like snapshot tests, actual tests that explicitly describe the behaviors that you're guaranteeing. I think if you do those things, then you're best positioned, because then when you do an upgrade, you'll have a lot more early information about what's going to break or why or how. And that should de-risk the actual upgrade and deploying it.
That's some excellent advice, best practices for developers. Don't download stuff from other places for JavaScript.
Right.
And then also, of course, write your tests, folks, write your tests. Now for companies, and here's where it gets interesting, because I think this is where we need to shout it more from the rooftops, right? Like, I'm a multi-million-dollar company. Like, how can I make sure that I'm covered? Financial, like ownership and responsibility and contribution helps. So definitely a call to action earlier about if your employer, you already know what dependencies your employer are literally depending on.
Yeah.
Encourage them to participate in the sustainability of that.
Yeah. Arguably, they have a legal requirement, a fiduciary responsibility to invest in their stack, and open source is everyone's stack at this point.
Exactly.
It would be a really bad idea if that one dude that maintains curl stops doing it. Like that would be terrible for all of us. And
for literally everyone. I feel like there's curl in everything.
Exactly. And that one guy I think he's doing better than he used to be, but I don't think he's able to work on curl for full time and feel adequately compensated. And that's just one guy. And there's a lot of people out there or individuals that are just doing it by themselves and not getting paid for it.
Absolutely. I had the pleasure of actually interviewing Daniel a few years ago. And I remember at the time, he was still paying for himself out of his pocket for some of the servers. I'm like,
yeah,
how does this happen?
Right.
When this is something that is used by literally everybody.
And there's ways, like, I'm sure he's putting that on his resume helps him get jobs over time and stuff like that. So there's ways that you can improve your own career and life just by doing open source, but that's not the way it should work, right? you're providing value and you should be getting compensated in some way for that value. But it's hard to combine the philosophy of open source with the philosophy of capitalism. And that's, I think, why it's so difficult for everyone to figure out how to get money into the open source ecosystem. Because
That is
it
so
also
cool.
wouldn't work if everybody just charged for the software. Like that would bring us right back to the 90s,
Yes. No, thank you.
Right.
No, thank you. I think programs like GitHub sponsors, and I know there is a lot of other ways that,
Mhm.
like Tylift, and there is
Yeah.
a ton of other places where you can literally pay the maintainers. But not just because I work here, but I legitimately appreciate the sponsors, the way that it's been set up, because
Yeah.
it makes it very simple for you to look and see what is it that you're actually depending on. Like I know
Right.
GitHub as an organization literally runs that same exercise and look at the dependencies and then figure out how they can better support them, whether it be financially, resources, etc. So definitely encourage everyone there, whether your project is big or small. Go into sponsors, go into your account. I'll put a link in the notes, but it's definitely going to be an important exercise for you to go back and see what it is that your company is depending on, and then encourage yourself and whoever the powers to be to write the checks so we can keep maintainers like Jordan maintaining all these packages, and then we don't have to break everybody's, I don't know, I think refrigerators were running curl at one point. Like the smart fridge, and everybody's fridge doesn't break because Daniel actually got paid and can do his job.
I've actually found my name in the credits of my Xbox at one point. So like
I love this.
software can be anywhere, in
Absolutely.
very unexpected places.
Absolutely. Jordan, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us such incredible context and broad angles from the maintainer, creator point of view to what a company should be doing, how they should be an active participant in this ecosystem, not just take by the contributors, which is a point that sometimes we miss. Where can we find you other than I have shared your Twitter, of course?
Yeah,
Do you
Twitter,
have anything
GitHub.
coming up?
Yeah, and then the same username on almost any service. Look around, it's probably me. My email is
Perfect.
easy to find. So yeah, just reach out if you have questions or whatever. And especially if you want to contribute code or documentation, please, or money to any of my projects, please do. Happy to help.
I love it. Do you have GitHub sponsors set up?
I
think
do.
you do.
Yeah, I have GitHub sponsors set up. I use Tidelift. And then a couple of my plugins have open collectives. But yeah, GitHub sponsors is
Perfect.
probably the simplest for individuals.
We'll go ahead and share that as well and leave
Thank
that
you.
in the link of the show notes. So folks, take a look at your dependencies. You can do that by clicking on that little URL. And then when you figure out that you depend on Jordan, then go sponsor. And this is something that is so transactional, and I hate that bit, but it's necessary to be spoken about. I know different maintainers have different, it's like I guess rates or like whatever they put out that they say you can sponsor me, but most all, if not all, have an option that literally you can donate whatever you can donate.
Yeah, I put the tiers on there just because like I had never done that before, and so I just filled in what I thought would be some interesting rewards. But it's also open for one time or recurring any amount, because what am I going to do? Turn down some money?
Exactly. So folks, don't be like, obviously, and there's people that have very specific and very, what do you call it, ambitious tiers on their tier system, which is, hey, that's amazing, and get paid. I'm team get paid all the way. But don't be discouraged by maybe you can only donate $1 a month. That's $1 a month. That's going towards maintaining something that you depend on. You should go for it. 100%.
Absolutely.
I will share your GitHub as well here and on the notes. Do you have anything coming up? Is anything coming up at Hero Devs that you'd like to share with our audience?
We just recently partnered with Bootstrap to support version 3 and version 4. And there are more things coming. Nothing I can announce at the moment. And then as far as personal software, there will be new versions of various things coming out all the time. I have 400 some packages. Just keep your dependencies updated. Use Renovate or Dependabot or one of those tools, and
it's literally so easy
files.
to do now. Or not, it's so easy, but it's much easier than it used to be. Like
Absolutely.
It's much easier than it used to be. So we should all encourage to keep those good practices so we can continue to grow. Thank you so much, Jordan. I super appreciate you. Throughout this broadcast, and if you're catching the recording, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat, regardless of what point in time you're watching this. I will try and find you an answer. And if I can, then I'll probably DM Jordan, and hopefully he can help me find an answer for you.
Absolutely.
But if you're interested in something that you need some assistance to keep your things secured and make sure that end of life transition and all those good things happen, it sounds like the folks at Hero Devs and Jordan are doing an amazing job at that. So take a look at that. And of course, don't forget to sponsor. Please sponsor. Please pay the maintainers. Pay them and
And
pay
and
them.
actually, if you're going to do one thing, have your employer sponsor, because
Yes.
I'd much rather take your employer's money than your own.
Here.
But I'm happy to accept any contributions. It's nice to feel valued, even if it's a small amount.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jordan. I super
Yeah.
appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
For all of you, don't forget, I need you to go by GitHub, go ahead and give Jordan a follow so that you can stay up to date on all the amazing things they're doing. And if you have a need like you, check out Here Devs
Awesome.
and see what they can do for you. Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate you. We'll see you next time on the next Open Source Friday. Thank you for hanging with there today, folks, and take the rest of the day off, okay? Thank you. Bye, Jordan.